Hey fellas, you might be wondering why we're looking inside into the Prime Model Works headquarters. Well, it's because of that little guy right there. He decided to get up, chase sticks. Hey Ringo, we don't be eating that stuff. Anyway, it's 5:30 in the morning, and that's what time I normally get up. I usually get up maybe a little bit earlier, but he got me up and we went out and pooped and peed and all kinds of stuff. And there's the Tomcat. It is got decals on it, so we will see that in this episode, at least, a little bit. I'll fiddle with decals and show you some things. I did change the area near the exhaust. One of the viewers indicated that on the F-14As that they weren't black like I had them, so I went ahead and changed that. This is kind of a long episode, so I will cut this short and let's get on with the video. So let's go over the decals, fellas. Now, the only issue that I have with these Fighter Town decals is that there's so much on here and they're not organized by number or anything like that. They just have the decals and the instruction sheets. This is about all there is for the plane that I'm doing. So they really don't have any instructions on where things go. Now, obviously, if you're building the kit, you have the kit decal sheet, so you can kind of figure out from there where all this stuff needs to go and use reference pictures. But with all the decals they give you, it is kind of confusing. Now, the decals are really good. There's very little carrier film. They don't react very well to microsol. Really doesn't touch them. Solvaset does okay so far, and but with really tough areas, you might need to use a hairdryer. And I'll show you how that works. If you've never used a hairdryer for decals, I had a Wingnut Wings kit that I built. It was a Fokker or something. And they had all the, I forget what you call it, that pattern that goes on the wings. And I used a hairdryer for that, and it worked swimmingly. So I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate a couple of these. Now, what I like to use, I got a set of tweezers, these kind of curve here, so I can daintily pick up my decals. And I've got a cup of warm water on a coffee warmer. And I just use this, dip it in here. And disclaimer again, if you haven't seen my other videos in which I attempt decals, I am not a good decaler, so take this with a grain of salt. I'm sure most of you guys are probably better at this than I am. Now, I'm applying this directly over my painting coats. I didn't put any clear coat on it. It's not necessary. If you're concerned with silvering, you can get silvering on clear coats. I do it all the time. So if I'm going to get silvering, I'm going to get silvering on here just as well as I would with clear coats. I think what that is, silvering, what that is the air getting trapped in under the decal and causing the light to reflect differently, I believe. So, and that's caused by having a rough surface. Drinking some more coffee again, fellas. Having a rough surface and the decal not conforming over all of it. So let's figure out where this goes, and we will try to maneuver this. Now, one thing I have learned with putting decals over a flat or matte coat rather than a clear coat is they don't seem to grip as well, so you can move them around a lot easier, in my opinion. That may not be the case with all decals, but with my experience with most of them, that's what I found. So I'm gonna I wet the area down first, and I use this brush, and this is the only use that I have for this brush is for decals. I don't use it for painting. I don't use it for anything else, just decals. So I don't have any foreign stuff get in on my decals while I'm trying to do this. So let's take a look at this and try to get this lined up where we want it. And a lot of times with these tougher decals, you may not be able to do it with more fragile decals, as I use the tip of my tweezers to just maneuver it around. Now, if you want to use your finger, you want to dip your finger in first. Otherwise, the decal has a tendency to stick. And what's nice with this kit is I was able to leave these vertical stabilizers off, so that it just makes it a lot easier rather than trying to have to move the plane around and stuff. So let's see, the V probably needs to go a little more this way. Maybe down just a little bit. Okay, that looks good. Now I've also got a flat brush that I use just for decals that you can use to smooth out the decal and smooth out the air bubbles. But what I like to do first, I like to take a Q-tip, or for my friends over in Europe, the cotton bud. I wet it down first, and then I'll lightly roll over it and try to push some of that water out. Now, if you press too hard, sometimes you shift the decal and you got to go put it back to where you want it. Now, I am not very patient when it comes to decals. Now I'll take the dry end and I'll use the dry end to get the excess water off. Just like so. And like I said, these are really good decals. All right, so take a look at it, and it is somewhat conforming to this panel line just as it is, and if I left this, it probably would conform to it. But let me show you what the hairdryer does to it, and I'm not going to move the camera to show you the hairdryer, but I'll stay about this far away, and I'll put it on high heat, and I'll heat it up just so you can see, and I'll leave the camera running so you can tell how long I was doing this. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to take the wet portion, and it should be really soft. Now, you want to be careful when you do this that you're not doing it to a part that has like a lot of Mr. Surfacer or some other putty that reacts to heat. Because what'll happen is it'll melt it. And if you've glued parts together that that required 5-minute epoxy, it will also melt that as well. And you don't want to get it so hot that it obviously that it warps your plastic. But this will make it conform really nicely. And then you can also take my... You want to be careful because the heat really makes it soften up. So it can tear and stretch. But the nice thing about this too, using the hairdryer if you need to, is that it dries the decal quickly and you can move on to other stuff. All right, we'll take a look at this. And it is sinking down in that quite nicely into the panel line. I'll let this dry, and sometimes what I like to do is I'll like to run an X-Acto blade down this panel line and then add some Solvacet or something. But I think this will be okay the way it is. All right, so let's do the other one. Wow, this is almost 10 minutes of just doing 2 decals. Let me apply this one off camera. I'll come back and I'll show you how I apply the Solvaset. And again, this is for the newer guys that aren't familiar with this type of stuff. So, all right, so I've had a chance to let some of these settle down, and I'm not real happy with some of it. And I'm gonna turn this around and see if we can get a look. But right here in this decal, there's some bubbles, if you can see those. And that's air that's trapped in under that decal. Now, how I handle this is, excuse me, is I'll take a fresh X-Acto blade, or you can take a sharp needle, but I'll take a fresh X-Acto blade, and I'll come here, and I'm just gonna pop these little bubbles. Make a little bitty slice. I'm not pressing hard, just enough to cut through that decal. Okay. I'll take a little bit of Solvaset, and I'll put it on here. Now you want to be careful with Solvaset and what I'm about to do, because some decals can't handle it. I'm going to take a Q-tip and dip it in water. Take some of that water out just so I've got a moist Q-tip, and I'm just going to roll over this and try to push that air bubble out, or those air bubbles. And there are a couple other spots where that's happened. Now I will let that sit down, and hopefully I'll have gotten rid of those little bubbles. It's also happened on this one. And if you see where the, when I move it, there's some light reflecting. Now you can't always tell what's silvering and what's just the reflection of the shinier decal versus the matte surface. But if you look real close, you can see that some of these are going to be a little bit silvered. And because there's a panel line that runs right along here where I've got Goose and Maverick. So again, I'm going to take my sharp X-Acto blade. Going to try to find that panel line. And I'm just going to lightly score that decal right along the panel line. I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure, just enough to score it. And then up here, I can tell just the way I'm looking at it right here is I'm gonna have some silvering right up here. So I'm just lightly making some small cuts in it. And then I can come back with my Solvaset and just run it right along that decal again. And then I'll do the same with these that I've cut along that panel line. Now I'll let it set, come back and look at it again. If it's still that way, then I'll have to repeat these steps and just keep working at it until I get it. Now you don't want to be cutting too much, because then you end up cutting in the plastic and making the decal look crappy, which I've done that many times. So I'll let these dry. I'll go around and check some other ones that I've got on here. And then we'll come back and look at them when they've all settled down. All right, so let's take a look at what we're doing. The decals have settled down really nicely, and I took the opportunity before I put any clear coats or anything to go ahead and glue the vertical stabilizers in, and I used sprue goo on the inside, and they're on there nice and sturdy. It's been about maybe 8 hours since I put the decals on, so I did have to go over with some Solvaset, and I did have to take care of a couple more bubbles and a little bit of silvering, and I think I've taken care of all of it. So the Solvaset did a pretty nice job. I did have to go over it a few times, but that's typical, especially with me and decals. But you'll notice that the decals are somewhat faded, and how I did that was I just took some of the original light and dark ghost gray, and I made a mixture of it, highly diluted in isopropyl alcohol. And I went over it and I faded the decals, especially the gray ones, because if you look at pictures, and I'll flash one up here, you can see that in that picture that you can barely even make out the star and bar and some of these other decals that are on there. So blending them in really did help dull them down and kind of fade them out just by spraying that little bit of Tamiya paint. Now I'll show you how I'm doing this. And I left this part so you could see. You can see how dark this is. Now I have got just a little bit left of light and dark ghost gray, and it's basically 95% isopropyl alcohol and a little bit of paint. And I'm just gonna go over this decal and blend it in. And just fade it out just a little bit, so it matches the paintwork with the rest of the plane. Now it's so diluted that it's really not going to cause much of an issue by covering up my other details, but it is going to dull down that decal and make it just blend in there. Alrighty, so next what we're going to do is I'm going to throw a clear coat, and I vary my clear coats depending on how I feel. You can get a real smooth finish with Tamiya X22, I believe, clear. The gloss Tamiya clear. You can use Future, or it's actually called Pledge Floor Care, which is really inexpensive. You can get it at Walmart in the cleaning section, or you can use Alclad Aqua Gloss, which I'm really not a big fan of it. A lot of people, it's their go-to, but I never really did get used to it, I guess. So I'm going to use Pledge Floor Care on this one, or Future, however you want to, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is in your area. But so I'll show you how that works. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to throw a clear coat on this, and the reason I want to throw an acrylic clear coat is because I'm going to be using Enamel Washes, and from here on out I'm probably only going to be using like enamel or oil-based products to do the weathering. So the next thing I want to do after I decal is I'm going to do a panel line wash. Haven't decided which color, and if you've watched any of my videos, I don't always do a panel line wash, but I think with this display I want it to be a little more dramatic, so I'll probably use a darker panel line wash. So this right here is what people often refer to as Future. It's called Pledge Floor Care. I think they changed the name on it a while ago. And it's basically something that you would find in the cleaning aisle. And I got this at Walmart like maybe 2 years ago. And so this is how much I have left, and I use it a lot of times for my clear coats. So before I use this, I just want to dust or wipe off my model with a tack cloth. And this is the part that we just painted over the decal. And you don't have to thin this. In fact, you can even use this as a thinner for, say, Model Master model color. If you're going to shoot this through your airbrush, you have to thin it down. If you don't have a Vallejo thinner, you can actually use this as thinner for it. It just thins it down. So no need to thin it. It is pretty nasty stuff, even though it is an acrylic. It's one of those things that if you want to remove it, you can spray Windex on it and it'll take it off. I'm not sure if Windex removes the Tamiya paint. I really haven't experimented much with that, but Windex does remove it, and so does isopropyl alcohol. Another thing, after you use this, it will stick like glue to the parts on the inside of your airbrush, so clean it out really well. And like I mentioned before, what I like to do is I like to put some isopropyl alcohol and let it sit after I get done using my airbrush, and that'll keep it from locking up. So let me put on the respirator. Now you want to be careful and not not shoot too heavy of a coat. Because it does have a tendency to run if you get it too heavy. Okay, and that's all there is to it. Now this dries pretty quickly, but I usually wait a day. So this is the afternoon. Tomorrow morning I'll probably come back and then I'll start my weathering on it, or my panel line wash on it. Now the big advantage of this is it's easy to use and it's really inexpensive and it's easily accessible. Like I said, it's at Walmart in the cleaning aisle. So that's all there is to using this stuff. I'm going to get on with spraying the rest of it, and I will see you in the morning, but for you, it'll be a couple seconds away. Good morning, fellas. All right, first things first. Had a comment yesterday after I posted the video from a guy named Matthew, and I really appreciate it. He sent me some really cool illustrations of, I guess, what he had come up with after researching the Top Gun Tomcat. And he had let me know that the area that I'd painted black back here where the exhaust nozzles attach is actually metallic and is similar in appearance to the exhaust nozzles. So I went ahead and painted those. I know the bottom here is a little bit darker brown, so I'm going to come back with some oil paint when after I put a flat coat. I'm going to darken this area up with oils. So I did have to remask and just sprayed some dark aluminum over this and then my transparent colors. So kind of a pain in the butt, but I want to get this right for the owner as best I can. And one thing I forgot to mention, you can actually use enamel washes over top of Tamiya paint. So I could have used enamel washes over top of the flat coat without having to clear coat it. However, you want to protect your decals, and that's the main reason why I throw a clear coat on here. Also, if you've got a, wipe that off. If you've got a clear coat on, not only does it protect your decals, but it's a little bit easier to wipe off if you're doing panel line washes. Now, if you're doing oil work and blending some oils in, you'll probably want a flat coat, and we're going to do that probably on the next episode because this one's running a little bit long. But I want to go over the washes that I use on acrylics. So if you've got an acrylic, paint or a clear coat, then you can use enamel washes. Now, one of the ones that I typically use are these ones by Ammo MIG. And I've got a couple different samples laid down that I put down about 10 minutes ago, just to see. So I've got Black Knight on the back, and then Blue Dirt up here. And I just wanted to see what kind of colors that I wanted. So I put those on here. And now I can just take a dry paper towel and wipe it away, and it should stay in the panel lines. Now this is one of those models that's got real nice tight panel lines. So, okay, now the black stands out a lot more than the Blue Dirt. And when I do panel line washes, I don't always just use one panel line wash for the whole thing. I think with this one, I want something that stands out a little bit more, so I'll probably go with a black or real dark color. Now, if you don't have these Ammo MIG washes, you can always use oil paint. Now, not all oil paints are the same. Here I've got some pretty good oil paints called Abteilung 502, and I really like them. So I'm just going to show you how we can mix up some oil paints and make our own wash. Now you can actually just put the oil paint in the cracks and wipe it away, which I've done before. But just to make a wash, all you have to do is, I'm going to make a dark gray wash. I'm just going to lighten this black just a little bit. So I'm mixing some off-white and some black. The next one I've got is some odorless mineral spirits that I get at the hardware store or Walmart. And I'm going to mix some of these odorless mineral spirits and dilute this. We'll mix it up here. And I'm going to make a nice little wash. It's a nice dark gray wash. I actually like that color. Sometimes I don't typically use just straight black, but it does look rather striking. May not be as realistic, but it does look striking when you get it get the whole model done in black. Okay, so we can use this. This might be a little thick, so I may have to thin it down, but then I can also come in here and I can use a pen wash. And I'm trying to do this with one hand. Hopefully you can pick this up, but it will go down and run along the panel lines. Now, I typically like doing pen washes. It does take longer than just smearing it over the entire model, which you can do. But with the pen wash, it's a lot easier cleanup, okay? So there's that wash. And if you don't have oil paints or good oil paints, I wouldn't recommend getting the cheap ones from Walmart. They're not good. I would recommend 502 Aptolung. I've heard good things about Winsor & Newton, and there's specific Winsor & Newtons that you should get. I don't know much about them, but I've just heard that they're pretty good. So there's some other videos out there on those types of oil paints, but these are the ones I use. They're kind of expensive, but I think they're worth it. Okay, if you've got some Testors enamel, not acrylic, Testors enamel, you can make your own wash with this stuff. And this is really old. I never use my Testors paint. But you can do the same thing with this as you do the oil paint. So we will put this in here. And I think this is like tire black or something, so it's got a little bit of brown in it. And then we will thin it down with some mineral spirits. And you can use this as a wash all over acrylics as well. Let's just dab this in here. Now you don't want to be putting an acrylic wash over an acrylic paint. Likewise, you don't want to be putting enamel wash over enamel or oil paint unless you've got it clear coated with an acrylic. So make sure you have the opposite paint. And it's always good to just test it out on a discrete location if you're not sure. When I first started modeling, I had no idea. I just saw people put washes on, so I had an acrylic, yeah, it was acrylic overcoat or clear coat, and then I put acrylic washes on it, and I couldn't figure out why every time I tried to wipe the wash away using acrylic thinner, that it wiped away the paint underneath. So, yeah, I totally understand. So looks like this is dry. This was my oil paint, I believe. And I think I still like the black. Now, I usually let this dry a little bit longer, but here's the enamel paint that I used. And you can just wipe it away. And again, this is a dry paper towel. So I think I'm going to go with the Black Knight, but that gives you a little bit of idea of what you can use for your washes. All right, I'm going to get to washing this with the Black Knight. I'm just going to go along like you saw me do with the pen wash over the whole thing and let it dry, then wipe it away. And then probably, since this one's run a little long, I'll put a flat coat on it on the next episode, and we'll do some oil paint.